All right, hey folks, so the topic of today is top set and back off set loading protocols, what it is, what its limitations are, and how people screw it up. So thanks for making it onto my channel. If you have any comments or questions about today, please pop them down below. And if you'd like to work with me on your own physique and strength goals, there is a link in the description. So firstly, let me just describe what we're talking about here. We're just talking about the top set and back off set loading protocol, which is popularized in the modern times by Jordan Peters, who trains out of the UK. And it's the style of training where you work up to one all-out set and you hit that set for maybe 5 to 8 reps, and then you do a back off set. And usually the focus is very heavily on progression and keeping the number of sets in the workout low, so you're able to pour all your focus and attention into those sets to really improve them. That's the general idea. And I want to say that it's an extremely popular approach, and it's popular for the reason that it's extremely effective. It is very, very effective. I interviewed a number of top amateurs a couple of years ago, and they were all using this approach. And these were guys in the 280 to 290 range, all of which have turned pro since then. It's a highly effective way of training. Okay, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. So I want to give you firstly some historical perspective on the training protocol, and then we're going to talk about ways in which people screw it up. So, historical perspective. Now, this part might be a little bit controversial, and it might blow some people's heads a little bit, but basically, it is just a very systematized pyramid training. Okay, that's all it is. Bodybuilders have been trained like this for decades, but it is systematized to focus on the important parts of the routine, which is the all-out set at the end, followed by potentially the back-off set, and to focus on the weight progression rather than just the pump and the squeeze. Okay, so in terms of a historical perspective, it is very much what bodybuilders have been doing for a while. The added focus from Peters and from Dorian Yates is more to do with the focus on the progression and the intensity of that one all-out set. And it was reputed that Mike Mensa got very angry once when somebody said, well, I saw you train, and you basically just train like everyone else. You do a warm-up set, another set, and then an all-out set, and then you do, and that's it. And they're like, well, that's why everyone else trains as well. That's how Arnold used to train in the 60s. Well, he does a warm-up set, and another set, and another set, and he does a heavy set, and that's it. He goes on to the next exercise. And apparently Mensa got very angry about this. He's like, no, nonsense. I don't train like Arnold. I train with a low volume. But then to Arnold, those 4 sets, he counted as 4 sets. To Mike, he counted that as 1 set. So it's semantics, a lot of it is. And Dorian's approach was very much the same. Just so you guys know, I grew up about an hour away from Temple Gym. And so back in the day, I started training in Dorian's heyday. So I started about 98, 99. That's when I started my home gym. I went to an actual proper gym about 2000, and I was exposed to all these methods. But everybody in that vacuum about a couple of hours drive around Dorian all trained the same way. All the big bodybuilder guys trained the same way. And bodybuilding was actual hardcore bodybuilding was far bigger then. You could go to a couple of gyms in town back in 2000, and they would be full of big guys. Like the gym that I first went to when I first started training was full of huge, like bodybuilder type guys, and they all train like this. Now, as you do when you're a kid, you eventually go sort of talk to these guys. And back in the day, like when I was just a kid, I used to talk to these big guys at the gym all the time, asking for advice, how to train, all that kind of stuff, because that's what you did. You didn't have the internet really. And so they would all tell me the same thing: get stronger. And if I watched them train, they would all train in this manner. I believe that it was really the magazines that glamorized the approach as something massively different. Dorian himself believed that he had struck on sort of a training routine which was different, but it wasn't for the way that the session was performed. It was more the emphasis on that final set. It was more the work ethic. It was more the 4 reps, the going all out to failure and beyond, rather than the way the actual training session was set up. The training session looked very similar to what everyone else was doing at the time. It was a body part split. You pyramided down to a top set. The difference with Dorian was he did a lot more in that top set. So whereas he would call 1 set on the incline press 1 set, maybe he did 6 warm-ups leading to that. Somebody else might call that 7 sets. So there was a difference in semantics, and there was a different in intention, which then made it seem like a completely different routine. There were similarities though, and there were ways in which the routine was different, but today I just want to point out the similarities there for a second. Now, if we have a look at this, for example, just quick sort of side tangent. This is an example of pyramid training. Now, I've written up here 3 different ways of looking at these 5 sets. And I want you to answer down below. How many sets do you see? How many working sets do you see? Do you see 5 working sets, as in the left example? Or in the middle example, do you see 2 working sets and 1 feeler? Or in the end example, do you see this as 2 working sets only? What do you see? So on the left-hand side, that would be considered traditional bodybuilding. Like your Arnold might say that's 5 sets. In the middle, that might be something like, I think Fuad Abiad would say that's 2 sets and a feeler. And on the right-hand side, that would be the Jordan Peters way of doing things, which is just classified as 2 sets. But look at the workout. They're all the same. Anyway, that's just a minor point. I don't want to get hung up on that too much, because what I actually want to talk about is a bit more about the routine and how it works. So let's just classify what it is. Essentially, it's where you work up to 1 top set in the 5 to 8 range, and then do a back off set in a higher up range of anywhere between 10 to 14. Now, there are some strong benefits of this approach. Firstly, you are progression focused. Now, unless you are a genetic outlier who can grow from just pump and fluff work, you are going to need to get stronger in decent rep ranges with good form to get bigger. That is how it's done. And for everyone who's not a genetic elite, not on a bunch of drugs, that is how it's done. Big guys, if they are natural, tend to be strong guys. So it makes you progression focused. As a consequence of the routine, you become progression focused. And as a result of that, it stops you from training with too little intensity. So a lot of people in the gym are not focused on progression. They don't really push themselves because they're not focused on where to go. Like when I first started training, one of the reasons I believe why I made such good progress wasn't because I was anything special genetically. Like I wasn't. I definitely wasn't. But I had goals in my mind because I read books. There was no real internet at the time. There was one website that we had, but I read a book, and I got that book from a magazine, Flex, the UK version of Flex magazine. And in that book were some strength standards, which I aimed for the first 3 to 5 years. No one else around me knew what those strength standards were. I had them in my head as something, because somebody, the guy in that book, told me that these standards were realistic for somebody in my position. So I went for them hell for leather. Nobody else around me had those goals in my mind. They all thought that getting a 2-plate aside bench was a big deal. I didn't. They all thought that getting a 3-plate aside squat was a big deal, or a 4-plate aside deadlift. Like I didn't. I really wanted a 3, 4, and 5, and I had those numbers seared into my brain. And we had all these conversations when I did my strength standards video. Like we talked about we debated the value of those. But what those strength standards gave me was they made me progression focused, and that is why this routine is immensely useful. And that is why if you are strength focused, and if you are progression focused, and the rest of the people in your gym aren't, I guarantee you will make better progress than them over the next year, because they'll just be flailing around, not really putting in the effort. So firstly thing is it makes you progression focused. So you're focused on getting a little bit stronger and improving yourself every week, every session. Next thing is it stops you from training with too little intensity. So you're less likely to do a bunch of pump and fluff stuff. These are the 2 major roadblocks for most people. Most people will flit around from exercise to exercise, not really focusing on the same thing, focus on any one thing. And most people will do far too much fluff and puff stuff, which is not aimed at progression. I mean, just as a side tangent, I don't know if you guys watched Fuad Abiad's podcast, but there was a bit on that recently where they were all insanely shocked at the fact Jordan Peters sticks to the same exercise for 6 to 8 weeks before he moves on to get the most out of that training exercise before he moves on. They were shocked at the fact that somebody would stick to, say, the incline dumbbell bench for 6 to 8 weeks consecutively to get stronger on that exercise before they move on. That basic stuff shocked them. Shocked Fuad Abiad and Guy Sistanino and one of the other guys. I think Ben and Nick Walker were a lot more understanding. They were like, yeah, that's what we do as well. But like Fuad was just like, wow, that's crazy. Holy crap, you're sticking to an exercise for more than a week to progress on it? What kind of voodoo magic is this? And I was sitting at home thinking, wow, that is what you can do when you have amazing genetics. you can basically just forget about all this kind of stuff. But yeah, those are the two major roadblocks for why most people don't make progress, because they are not progression focused and they train with too little intensity. And that is what the top set back off set addresses. So that's some of the benefits of it. Now, I want to just, I don't want to criticize it because there's nothing really to criticize. Like, this is basically how you train, right? It's certainly a good way of training, but it's more, so I don't want to criticize it because there's not really anything to criticize in and of itself. But there are multiple ways in which people mess this up. So how do people F this up? So firstly, they don't actually consider the individuality of the muscle groups or of them, how their own individuality. Everything is top set, back off set. Everything. It's like, you got a cold, top set, back off set. COVID, top set, back off set. Lost your job, girlfriend left you, top set, back off set, all good. So like, that seems to be the panacea for everything. Like, everything is top set, back off set, whether it's a cable bicep curl or whether it's a bench press. That needs to be addressed because it's not always the case. Guys like the hypertrophy coach, what's his name? Joe Bennett. Guys like him have recently come out and addressed that by saying you can do different things for delts and arms, and those typically are the areas which don't respond as well. Jordan himself has come out and said he does different things for arms, but you need to bear in mind there is a certain level of individuality for every person, and there is a level of individuality for every body part within every person. So yeah, it's not just a case of like anything goes wrong, the solution is top set, back off set. Like, you go to the doctor and go, my knees are hurting, and he just says top set, back off set. Anyway, I've overdone that joke. But so next thing is, the way that people screw this over is they focus on progression over form. I've seen this a lot in my social media because, again, it is really popular in the UK. People will move weight over adhering to good form. So, like, for example, Romanian deadlifts. People will turn those into actual just partial deadlifts and say, yeah, my Romanian deadlift's getting better. It's like, no, it's not, dickhead. Like, you're swearing there. It's like, no, it's not. It's like, no, it's not. You're just doing a partial deadlift. Oh, terrible. You're just doing a partial deadlift over and over again. And then the next thing is progression over stimulus. Some people will have decent form, but they won't actually feel the muscle work. Now, you could argue that it doesn't really matter, but I would say it probably does, particularly as you get into the smaller and smaller muscle groups. It does matter. So you want to ensure that you're getting maximum stimulus rather than just progressing the weight. If that means holding on to that weight for a couple of weeks and just becoming better at getting a mind-muscle connection, it's probably a good idea. And as I mentioned earlier, arms and delts typically don't respond well for most on this top set, back off set approach. So it's worth being a bit more flexible with how you approach training for those areas. Okay. All right, folks. Now, in terms of sort of just to wrap this up, so in conclusion, it's a really good approach, but I think it's something where you've got to use your brain a little bit when it comes to individualizing for certain areas and for certain populations, for certain body parts, and just for yourself as opposed to someone down the road. You've also got to place a bit more emphasis onto what actual bodybuilding is. We're trying to build our muscle tissue up. We're not just trying to move a weight from A to B. And that is something which should be addressed. You're still a bodybuilder at the end of the day. You're not a powerlifter on a hack squat. Okay? Bear that in mind. So wrapping your knees, doing a reverse band just so you can lift more weight on the hack squat is probably not a good idea. So it's a very good approach, but there are many ways in which people screw this over. One thing I didn't actually touch on, which I probably should, is warm-up sets. You know, one of the good nice things about pyramid training is you actually do quite a lot of warming up. And it was the same with the Dorian Yates approach. Dorian did a lot of reps getting into before he did the working set. He was in a sweat and he was like really warm before he got to his working set. Nowadays, I see people approaching warm-up sets like powerlifters. They'll do singles, double, triples, maybe fives, but that's it, leading up to the warm-up set, leading up to the working set, and then just to save and conserve energy for the main working set. That's not what we're trying to do, guys. We are trying to be as safe as possible. We are trying to provide as much stimulus as possible. If that means we lose a few kilos on our lift, but we are ultimately warmer and more pumped going into the lift, then that's a good trade-off. So take that trade-off. All right, folks, I'm going to call it there, and I will speak to you in the next video. Take it easy.